The fluorescent glow of the Galactic Defense Academy's tactical hall cast long shadows across Instructor Vel'kaar's chitinous plates. For 17 cycles, the Thravian had taught military doctrine to cadets from across the federated systems. He'd trained Zephrosians, whose strategic minds could calculate probabilities across 17 dimensions. He'd molded Krell warriors, whose exoskeletons could withstand plasma fire. He'd even instructed the peaceful Luminari, teaching them defensive protocols they prayed never to use. But the humans? The humans were different. Vel'kaar's compound eyes focused on the three figures seated in the back row of his advanced combat theory seminar. Lieutenant Kiera Chen sat with her hands folded, her dark eyes watching him with an unsettling intensity. Beside her, Corporal Marcus Reid leaned back in his chair, the picture of casual indifference. On his right, Private First Class Amara Singh took notes with methodical precision, her pen moving across paper with mechanical efficiency. They were always there, always quiet, always watching. "Today's scenario," Vel'kaar announced, his translator rendering his clicks and whistles into standard galactic, "involves a platoon-level engagement in urban terrain. You have 12 combatants facing an entrenched enemy force of approximately 40. Visibility is limited. Civilian casualties must be minimized. Who would like to propose an approach?" As always, eager appendages shot upward. Cadet Torval from Kepler 442b suggested a standard suppression and flank maneuver. Cadet Zilmora outlined a defensive perimeter strategy. Even shy Cadet Brenneep offered a suggestion about using environmental acoustics to mask movement. The humans said nothing. This had become a pattern Vel'kaar could no longer ignore. In every class, through every tactical discussion, across every combat scenario, the human cadets remained silent. They would nod occasionally, take notes, but never, not once, had they volunteered a strategy, questioned an approach, or contributed to the academic discourse. At first, Vel'kaar assumed it was cultural. Humans were newcomers to the Galactic Federation, only recently achieving faster-than-light travel. Perhaps they felt overwhelmed, outclassed by species with millennia of spacefaring history. But then he'd seen the simulation scores. Vel'kaar dismissed the class, watching as the students filed out in their various ambulatory fashions, walking, slithering, floating. The humans moved with a peculiar economy of motion, each step purposeful, their heads on constant swivel. "Lieutenant Chen?" he called out. "A moment." The human woman stopped, gesturing for her companions to wait. She approached Vel'kaar's dais with that same fluid grace all humans seemed to possess, the kind of movement that reminded Vel'kaar of footage he'd seen of Earth predators, cats, wolves, tigers. "Sir?" Her voice was calm, neutral. "I've noticed that you and your fellow humans rarely participate in class discussions. I wanted to ensure there isn't a cultural barrier I'm not addressing, or perhaps a linguistic issue with the translator." Something flickered across Chen's face. Not quite a smile, not quite anything Vel'kaar could identify. "No, sir, no barriers. We're just learning." "Learning," Vel'kaar repeated. "But you never offer your own insights? Never question the proposed strategies?" "We find it's better to listen, sir." "But the exercises are meant to be collaborative. Your perspectives would be valuable." Now Chen did smile, and it was one of the most unsettling expressions Vel'kaar had ever witnessed. It didn't reach her eyes. "With respect, sir, I don't think they would be." That evening, Vel'kaar sat in his office, the bioluminescent walls of the academy casting soft blue light across his workspace. Before him floated holographic displays showing class records, psychological evaluations, and simulation results. He'd taught thousands of cadets. He knew the signs of struggle, of incompetence, of mediocrity. The humans showed none of them. With a gesture, he pulled up the simulation logs. Every student at the academy ran tactical scenarios, computer-generated combat situations designed to test decision-making, resource management, and strategic thinking. Most cadets completed them in groups, collaborating to achieve objectives. The humans ran them alone. Vel'kaar opened Lieutenant Chen's file first. Scenario Alpha 7. Hostage rescue in a multi-level structure. 18 hostile forces, unknown number of civilians. Standard completion time, 47 minutes. Chen's time, 11 minutes 43 seconds. He must have read it wrong. He opened the replay log, watched through the simulated drone's perspective as Chen's avatar moved through the structure. No hesitation, no reconnaissance. She'd gone straight to the service stairs, a detail not highlighted in the briefing, and moved upward with mechanical efficiency. 3 minutes in, she'd bypassed the enemy entirely by moving through ventilation shafts the scenario designers didn't think anyone would find. She'd reached the hostages, neutralized 2 guards with weapons improvised from materials in the room, and extracted via window rappel using cable from the building's own security system. The scenario wasn't designed to be solved that way. It was meant to teach calculated risk assessment, team coordination, tactical patience. Chen had treated it like an inconvenience. Vel'kaar's manipulator appendages trembled as he opened Corporal Reid's file. Scenario Gamma 4. Defend a position against waves of attackers with limited ammunition. Standard completion. Cadets typically lasted through 3 waves before being overrun. Reid's result, 16 waves. Complete ammunition expenditure after wave 9, at which point he'd transitioned to traps. Traps. Vel'kaar watched the replay. Reid had used furniture, broken equipment, even structural weaknesses in the simulated building to create a kill zone that would have made a Krell siege master weep. Pressure plates connected to support beams, channeled pathways that funneled enemies into crossfire positions. At one point, he lured an entire squad into a room and collapsed the floor beneath them. The scenario gave points for defense. Reid had turned it into a slaughterhouse. Private First Class Singh's file was somehow worse. Scenario Delta 2. Navigate through a non-combat situation, a diplomatic negotiation that could turn violent. The objective was de-escalation. Every other cadet in Academy history had approached it as a social dynamics exercise. Singh had identified the 3 individuals in the room most likely to initiate violence, positioned herself to have line of sight to all of them simultaneously, and maintained what the simulation software flagged as threat assessment protocols throughout the entire encounter. She de-escalated successfully, but the behavioral analysis showed she'd cataloged 17 different ways to kill everyone in the room within the first 30 seconds. Vel'kaar felt something he rarely experienced: fear. He pulled up cross-species comparison data. The average Zephrosian cadet scored in the 82nd percentile, Krell warriors in the 89th. The humans? There was no percentile. They'd broken the metrics. With shaking appendages, Vel'kaar accessed the Academy's restricted files. He needed to know more about Earth, about humans, about the species that sat silent in his classroom while demonstrating combat capabilities that shouldn't exist. The file that opened made his translator pause, recalibrate, and attempt 3 times to process what it was reading before finally rendering it into standard galactic. Species classification: Earth, Sol 3, humans, Homo sapiens. Home world designation: Class 12 Death World. Threat level: extreme caution advised. Vel'kaar read on, his horror mounting with each line. Earth's gravity, 1.4 times galactic standard. Atmospheric oxygen content, toxic to 63% of known species. Native fauna includes apex predators in every biome, venomous species numbering in the hundreds of thousands, microscopic life capable of killing most galactic citizens within hours. And the humans had evolved as persistence predators. They'd hunted by following prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. They'd developed complex social hierarchies centered around group violence. They'd invented agriculture not to live in peace, but to support larger populations for warfare. The file included a timeline of human military history. Vel'kaar stopped reading after the first 1,000 years. The casual brutality, the geometric escalation of lethality, the creative applications of violence. It read like a horror chronicle. They'd weaponized splitting atoms. They'd turned diseases into tactical tools. They'd developed mathematics specifically to calculate more efficient ways to kill each other. One human civilization had invented a weapon so terrible that its own creators had sworn never to use it again, and then built tens of thousands more just in case. And now 3 of them sat in his classroom, learning the Galactic Federation's military doctrine with the same polite attention a master swordsman might give to a child explaining how to hold a stick. Vel'kaar requested an emergency meeting with the Academy's commandant, Fleet Admiral Zixnar, whose species, the Korthan, had served as the Federation's military backbone for 3,000 years. "You're concerned about the humans," Zixnar said. It wasn't a question. The Admiral's 4 eyes regarded Vel'kaar with an expression that might have been amusement. "Concerned doesn't begin to cover it, sir. Their capabilities are terrifying," Zixnar finished. "Yes, I'm aware." "Then why are they here? If they're already this advanced, why send them to our academy?" The Admiral rose from his seat, moving to the massive window that overlooked the Academy's training grounds. Below, cadets from a dozen species practiced formations that humans had mastered 10,000 years ago. "They're not here to learn tactics, Vel'kaar. They're here to learn restraint." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. "When we first made contact with Earth," Zixnar continued, "the Federation Council believed we'd found primitives, a species barely beyond their own solar system. But our xenopsychologists, they saw something else. They saw a species that had survived on a world that should have killed them 1,000,000 times over, a species that responded to every threat by becoming more dangerous. The humans' first response to discovering other life in the universe wasn't joy. It was to immediately assess threat levels and develop contingency plans for war with every species they encountered, including us. Within weeks of first contact, their military had developed 17 different strategies for defeating a Krell battle phalanx. They'd identified weaknesses in Zephrosian fleet formations that we'd been using successfully for millennia. They'd proposed weapons that violated 6 different galactic conventions.
Vel'kaar felt his respiratory system constrict. "So we made a deal," Zixnar said. "We would share our technology, our knowledge, our place among the stars. And in exchange, they would send their best warriors here. Not to learn how to fight, they know that better than we ever will, but to learn how to fight alongside us. To understand that violence isn't always the answer. To integrate their enthusiasm with our principles. They're quiet in your class because if they weren't, if they actually contributed their tactical insights, they would terrify their fellow students. They would demonstrate that every scenario you present has at least 3 solutions more efficient and infinitely more brutal than anything you've taught. They stay silent because their human commanders ordered them to, because speaking up would reveal exactly what they are. And what are they?" Vel'kaar whispered. Zixnar turned from the window, and his expression was grave. "Apex predators learning to live among prey." The next day, Vel'kaar stood before his class with a new understanding. He watched the 3 humans take their seats in the back row. Watched them fold their hands and prepare to listen. Watched them wear the mask of civilized students while their minds probably cataloged threat vectors and calculated response times. "Today," he began, his voice steadier than he felt, "we will discuss siege warfare. I'd like to open with a hypothetical." Lieutenant Chen met his eyes across the classroom. For just a moment, Vel'kaar saw past the polite student facade, saw the predator underneath, saw the same patient calculation that our ancestors had used to hunt prey across savanna grasslands for days until it collapsed from exhaustion. And he understood why she stayed silent, not from lack of knowledge, but from an abundance of mercy. 3 months later, when the Krell separatist fleet launched their surprise attack on the Academy, Vel'kaar finally saw what humans could do when silence was no longer required. The attack should have overwhelmed the station's defenses. The Krell had brought 4 warships against what they believed to be a lightly defended training facility. In their tactical calculations, they'd accounted for the Academy's defensive batteries, the possibility of a distress call reaching nearby fleet elements, even the combat capability of Krell's students who might side with the Federation. They hadn't accounted for 3 humans. Lieutenant Chen had taken control of the Academy's defensive systems within 40 seconds of the first shot. Not through authorization. She'd bypassed it entirely, rewriting access protocols faster than the AI could flag the intrusion. Corporal Reid had organized the terrified students into defensive positions that turned the Academy's corridors into a nightmare for boarders. And Private First Class Singh had done something with the communications array that Vel'kaar still didn't fully understand, but which had somehow convinced the Separatist fleet that they were facing a full Federation battle group. The engagement lasted 9 minutes. When the Federation relief fleet arrived, they found the Academy intact, the students safe, and 3 Krell warships crippled by defensive fire so precise it had disabled their engines without destroying them, preserving the crews inside. The 4th warship had retreated the moment its captain realized what he was actually fighting. Vel'kaar found Lieutenant Chen in the aftermath, standing in the shattered remains of what had been the tactical hall. She was checking on wounded students, her uniform singed, a cut above her eye leaking the red blood that seemed so symbolically appropriate for her species. "You saved everyone," he said. She looked at him with those predator eyes, and this time her smile was genuine. "We told you we were learning, sir." "Learning what?" "How to protect instead of destroy. How to disable instead of kill. How to save people who would have been acceptable casualties in the wars my ancestors fought." She paused, looking around at the students, Zephrosians, Krell, Luminari, even a few Thravians, all alive because 3 humans had stood between them and death. Violence is easy, Instructor. Any predator can kill. But choosing not to when you have the capability, that's what separates soldiers from murderers. That's what you've been teaching us, even if you didn't know it. Vel'kaar understood then. The humans hadn't been silent from shame or fear or inadequacy. They'd been silent because they were students in the truest sense, learning not facts or techniques, but wisdom, learning that their tremendous capacity for violence was a tool to be wielded with precision, not a hammer to strike with every time they encountered a nail. The Galactic Federation had given humanity the stars, and humanity, those quiet, watching, waiting apex predators, had chosen to protect them.